Good morning from WKYT News. I'm Bill Bryant, hoping you're enjoying your weekend. Later, we'll be talking with WKYT's Dick Gabriel about the attention that Muhammad Ali's death brought to his home state of Kentucky this week. People came from all over the world to remember the legendary boxer and humanitarian. That's a little bit later on from Dick Gabriel, who, by the way, grew up in Louisville at the time Ali was in his prime. But first, Kentucky Newsmakers. Madison County is continuing to be one of the fastest growing areas in the bluegrass, and there are growing pains as well. Nearly 100,000 people now call Madison County home. About half of that is urban in the growing cities of Richmond and Berea. Madison County is also home to EKU and Berea College and to historic Boonesboro and Whitehall. Tons of nerve agent are stored near Richmond at the Bluegrass Army Depot, and the timetable for ridding Central Kentucky of that threat is being talked about again as well. Recently, a jail task force recommended that Madison County build a much larger facility and also determined that about 85% of offenders are there for some reason related to drugs. How to move forward on that issue is something that Judge Executive Reagan Taylor is focusing on now. Judge Taylor is joining us today, and we thank him for coming in for Kentucky Newsmakers. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Appreciate you having me.
Well, let's get right to this jail issue. You have reached out to the public in your community. You're asking for feedback and ideas because you know this is going to be very costly, and there's also a debate on the whole approach to the problem of drugs. Tell us about the dilemma that you're facing.
We have currently, as our responsibility of inmates, approximately 340 to 350 inmates at any given time. We have a 170 bed facility in Madison County, and we're housing about 300 in our jail facility, and then we'll have 40 or 50 outside in other counties, having to house them in other counties. As we said,
85% of those determined to, for one reason or other, be there because of substance.
Substance abuse, yeah. It's drug addiction. The drug epidemic is, and it's not just Madison County. This is a nationwide issue. But the drug epidemic is really going to break counties, because counties, jail, corrections facilities are the responsibility of your fiscal courts. They're not cities or obviously Berea and Richmond don't have to pay anything towards our jails because of the way KRSs are. So it's the county's responsibilities.
Do you believe that if there's to be a new treatment facility and a jail facility, that it needs to be comprehensive and it would tackle the drug issue in a different way?
I do. We obviously set up a jail task force, and we asked community members in our community to sit on them, and they all had different. They brought different things to the table. They had expertise from all different avenues of life. We had just anonymous citizen members. We had school, bank, accountants, sheriff, lawyers, judges. We had just a great group of guys that and girls that helped us. And really, when we got looking into the details of it, everything brought us back to this drug epidemic. And when you looked at numbers from past, circuit court numbers, indictments in Madison County Circuit Court in 1996 were 107 indictments, and in 2015 there were 623. So in a 20-year time, that's how much just indictments have grown. Well, when you take those numbers, and I'm kind of a numbers guy, it would potentially, in 10 years, we would have 749 inmates if you took the indictment numbers and we kept on that same trend.
So you went to some other locations.
We did.
And visited, and you found some programs that appear to be working. You saw some people who have the same issues you do in terms of a shortage of space, and you have some counties that surround you that do not have jails.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. Taking all of that, where do you go with this?
We came to the conclusion that we have to stop just housing inmates, and we have to start trying to heal them. And so we're looking at ways that we can potentially, instead of building just this massive maximum security new detention center, that we could put our focus into more of a rehabilitation, vocational training, instead of them sitting inside, a facility for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6-year sentence. You know, let's put structure to their day. Let's get them educated. Let's help them be, when they come out, to be a good citizen of society, that they could maybe have some type of certification. You know, we have Eastern Kentucky University and Brick College. We potentially have partners in leadership there that could help us in orchestrating, you know, your classroom facility, maybe some computer type classes, plumbing, HVAC. You know, we want to even potentially, you know, have structure their day where they raise a garden. You know, you're on a bigger footprint, and you somewhat come self-sustaining.
Give them an opportunity to do something once they're released. The recidivism rate is extremely high.
Very high.
Yeah.
70%, I think. Our great county attorney called, or actually met with him a few weeks ago, and I think he had 57 on a docket one day in district court, and every one of those were repeat offenders and multiple offenses.
So your goal is to try to lessen that.
That's right.
That rate.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you take the 80% of drug rehab, or the drug cause of the drug epidemic, and you take the 70% recidivism, well, I mean, you do those numbers, we wouldn't be even talking about a jail right now, because our 170 bed facility would be big enough. You know,
you have that facility was built in the early 1990s. As I understand it, this county still owes some money on that, and now you're talking about having to build one that is much larger. What is likely to be proposed? Is that why at this point you're reaching out to the public for some answers, because this is going to cost tens of millions of dollars, right?
It is. When you look at, when I first came into office, we owed $3 million on our facility. Built in 1990, so you can do the math, 26 years old. But I think that was the original facility. There was an addition built several years later. So when I came into office, 22 years was the original number. But $3 million, and you know, to me, that's a lot of money, you know, to still owe 20 years later. So, but really, that's a drop in the bucket from what this drug epidemic is actually costing our county. We had there was plans, my predecessor had plans drawn to add on 150 beds to our facility. When you look at the cost of it, plus the number of beds that it was going to add, and the debt that we're going to be put on us, it just does not make sense to me. You're looking at $12 million debt, and we'll still be full.
So you're talking about building a new facility? So
yes, some type of facility.
What's your estimated cost?
If we built a new facility, because my estimate is in 10 years we need 749 beds if we keep going like we're going, all right, that the estimates that I've gotten would be $52,000 to $53,000 a bed, which is about $45 million if you did the 8 plus the, you know, with the land.
Where do you get that money?
It's a good question. There's no way that the county, with the taxes and the incomes and the revenues that we bring in right now, there's no way that that we could afford to do it. You know, one of the things, and there's options, and this is what I want to hear from our community on is you know, how are we going to pay for this? This is a problem. We're averaging $230,000 a year right now housing inmates outside our county. That's just housing them, paying the Casey counties and the Clay counties and the Clark counties to house our inmates, and we appreciate the relationship we have with them. And so, you know, you can always do a county insurance premium tax. You know, when I ran, I said I'm not going to sugarcoat things. I'm not going to exaggerate things. You know, and it is what it is.
But you're having to put new taxes or tax increases on the table at this point if you consider doing that, right?
Yeah, if we do. I mean, I don't know how else that property taxes, I mean, is not going to do any good.
On the other end, how much is it costing you at this point in terms of not being able to do the kinds of services that you would like to provide to citizens, to go as it is, or if you go with this additional expense to build this, what is the impact to your ability to deliver services?
It's huge. Right now, between the jail and the sheriff's office, which to me is part of this drug epidemic, we're transferring about $3.1 million a year. You know, the fiscal court out of the general fund is transferring $3.1 million. And, man, it's devastating. You know, we had to cut a vehicle out of solid waste department this year out of the budget. This vehicle's got 400,000 miles on it.
What are the human costs that you're not seeing of the drug epidemic? And this, again, as you said, it would not just be certainly your county, but in so many across the state. As you sit in your leadership position and look at the costs to society, what do you see?
Man, I think it's when I look at this, I'll start with my dad, all right? And if my dad 20 years ago, 30 years ago had done drugs, and I had grown up in that environment, all right? I had a brother and a sister. So the chances are, if I grew up that way, then now my dad doing it, which is one person, trickles down, now potentially 3 are doing it, all right? Now I get to my life, and I have kids, my brother has kids, my sister has kids. Well, now from just 2 generations down, that one person that made those wrong choices has potentially, you've got 12 out there in just 20 years, you know, 30, 40 years. And I think that's what you're seeing. You're seeing that indictment in circuit court in just 20 years ago that has 6 times, you know, it's increased 6 times the amount. And I think it's until we start healing, you're going to continue. We're just going to continue to kick the can down the road, and you're not going to arrest your way out of this. There's no way.
All right, so but something you're determined to
and I would like to make one final statement.
I've got more coming up.
Okay.
But,
all right, sorry.
We'll take a break. We're going to talk more about the growth in Madison County, some of the other challenges, and what's the latest at the Bluegrass Army Depot. We are back with Madison County Judge Executive Reagan Taylor, and then later Dick Gabriel talks about Muhammad Ali's legacy. Welcome back to WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers program. We're visiting with Madison County Judge Executive Reagan Taylor, who certainly is talking about the challenges facing his growing county right now, might be referred to as growing pains, which, by the way, Judge, some counties would like to have, certainly have that problem. But as you talk about a drug problem, the fact that you're going to have to build a new facility, a new jail, it's going to cost your county tens of millions of dollars. It's cutting into your ability to deliver services to other people. You say this is a statewide issue.
It is. And I truly think that all branches of government have to come together, because it is statewide. All right, it's affecting our county heavily, but I think all branches of government have to come together to create a solution to the problem. And it takes the judicial side, it takes the legislative side, and it takes the executive side to really figure out and to change laws if it takes changing laws, if it's changing the KRS, your statutes, then it's what it takes. Because then everybody's, you know, I've said many times that you and I don't have to take the same road to Cincinnati, but we have to know that that's our destination. So in everybody's day-to-day business decisions, that we're going on the same path. You know, we can't have laws that contradict what the police are doing, you know, or sentencing. I asked our county attorney, I said, how many, if you convicted, sentenced the same amount of people, or if you convicted people today like you did 10 years ago, could we have 500 in our facility? And he said, yes.
Yeah.
You know, and it's dangerous. It's a serious situation. And at the end of the day, do we spend money on jail and police keeping us safe, or do we want to spend it on our roads?
And you're just urging a statewide effort to address this.
Yeah. And I'm addressing it from a healing standpoint, not just housing.
What is the update on the destruction of a nerve agent that is stored right in the middle of your county at the Bluegrass Army Depot? It's a threat to close to 1 million people in the Bluegrass region here.
It is. We had a CDCAB meeting yesterday. We got an update. Right now, the projections are that the demill process will be over in 2024. Obviously, I'm sure you heard about the welds that had been broken on some of the pipes. I don't know all the acronyms as well as a lot of them do, but all that is going well. I think yesterday, if I remember the numbers correctly, there's maybe about 1,000 more welds to be fixed. They fixed, I think, about 2,500 of them so far, and it has. They're potentially maybe just a 6-month behind schedule. They talked, but it really wasn't going to affect any of the process of starting the mustard and then moving on to the nerve.
What
agent.
happens when at the depot after the nerve agent is gone? Won't it have a tremendous economic impact on your community?
Oh man, it is. It'll be huge. The county alone, this is not including the cities, the county alone will lose over $1 million just in the occupational tax.
Because those folks will move on after the project's done.
Unless we, right now, become visionary, all right, and we reach out and we try to implement some industry that replaces those jobs. And that's one of the things that we're trying to work on right now. We have an economic development working group that is working together to come up with avenues to replace those jobs.
You've been committed to recreational opportunities. You've developed some parks and continue to do that. You have the Will Green Lake that is open to the public.
That's right.
for folks there as well. Anything new in recreation in the area?
No, we're one of the things we're trying to do is really truly promote our parks more. We actually had what do you call it? What's the hospice event there? The Derby Eve Gala.
Yeah, the Derby Eve event.
Yeah. And so this was the first year that it had it actually at the Battlefield Park. Had a tent in the parking lot. Had so many compliments. And so we're really trying to push and promote all of our parks now to be more utilized.
You're adjacent to a merged government with Lexington Fayette Urban County government that's now 42 years old. Louisville Metro did that some years ago. Some say that that can provide cost savings in counties that are, you know, half urban, half rural, as yours is. Warren County has tried it. Any thought given to any kind of a merged government there, which would immediately make you the third largest city in the state if it were to happen?
You know, I've heard there's been a lot of business people, you know, say, you know, that's what we need is a merged government. You know, I think that it would potentially be okay to look into, to see. You know, we have sort of done a little bit of studying. How does all that work? And at the end of the day, a merged government is really the decision of the people. You don't just up and say, the fiscal court and the city commissions or the city council in Berea, they don't just come up and say, hey, we're going to join government. It happens. There's actually a process. And I'm a big believer in being efficient. And if being merged is more efficient and is better for our community, then I'm all for it. If that means that I would step away, somebody else would take the reins because being together would be more efficient, then I'm willing to do so. I think it's definitely something that potentially wouldn't hurt to look at later down the road.
Requires study.
That's right.
All right. Thanks for coming. Reagan Taylor, the Judge Executive in Madison County. Coming next on WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers, Dick Gabriel on the attention that Muhammad Ali's death has brought to his hometown and to Kentucky, and why so many have mourned the loss of a boxer and humanitarian. Welcome back to Kentucky Newsmakers from WKYT. Boxer Muhammad Ali's death brought people from around the world to Kentucky to remember and mourn. Ali grew up in Louisville. He never forgot about being a Kentuckian. He was also a polarizing figure in America. Dick Gabriel is joining me to reminisce some, and he is here. And Dick, you grew up in Louisville when Ali was coming up and then in his prime, right?
Yeah, it was kind of fun. It was interesting. always in the news, always on local television, and then when he was on national television, which was a lot, it just seemed really natural. There he is again, Cassius Clay, and then, you know, oh, okay. And what was really fun was you never missed a fight if you could, if it was on television or if you had to go downtown to a movie theater to watch something. You know, in this corner from Louisville, Kentucky, and if you're a Kentuckian or a kid from Louisville, you're like, hey, that's my hometown, you know. For a little while, he fought out of Chicago. We're like, hey, man. Then he came back to be fighting out of Louisville. But you're right. He never forgot about it. And hearing a lot of the old-time sports writers and sportscasters who covered him, they loved it because he would fill their notebooks and fill their cameras and always made time for them.
Seemed to play with them, right? And, yeah. I mean, it was, as you know, there are figures who are fun to cover because they see that as their opportunity for
low-hanging fruit. Yes, is what we call it. But yeah, you know, and to his credit, Ali might not have been, you know, what we call book smart. One of our family's babysitters went to high school.
Yeah, I was going to ask, are there those first-degree separation?
Yeah, exactly. You know, and she said, you know, he's not the brightest guy. I think he flunked typing or something. But that wasn't what was important to him, and what he was so smart at was marketing his own brand. He was one of the first people to do that, and he was one of the first guys to have management. I mean, a really good contract. There were 11 Louisville businessmen who knew virtually nothing about boxing, and they formed a syndicate, and they stood by him. These are photos from when he refused to be inducted. I found these photos in our attic from the Associated Press from back in 1966 and 67. He's all smiles here, but this was a difficult time in his life, of course, when he refused induction into the United States Army. Yeah, he was the pride of Louisville. There's no question about that.
Do you remember what the reaction was like in Louisville during those days?
Well, it was divided, as you might expect. You know, I think the older generation wondering why he didn't just go to the Army like Elvis. You know, Elvis Presley never had to pick up a gun in combat. Ali clearly was not going to, but everybody else was, and of course he was objecting on religious grounds. But it was a religion that most people in Louisville couldn't relate to. You know, it was the Nation of Islam, which scared a lot of people. That scared a lot of black people, quite frankly. So as I said earlier, he was in the headlines a lot for his fighting. Now he's in the headlines for a different reason. And for a kid, you know, 8, 9, 10 years old as I was, it's very confusing, you know, because this is the guy we're supposed to see fighting on TV, not in a courtroom.
So he spends those years in his prime out of boxing, and then did he ever return to the ring?
Oh, absolutely he did. Wasn't quite the same. Yeah. But he reinvented himself in the ring just as he reinvented himself in the eyes of the world. When he broke away from the Nation of Islam, you know, remained a Muslim, but really embraced more of the peaceful, loving side of things, but had to reinvent himself as a fighter. And there he is with Jimmy Ellis. Jimmy Ellis was one of his sparring partners, and when Ali was out of the ring, Jimmy Ellis became one of the guys who wore the championship belt, and therefore, along with Greg Page, one of 3 men out of Louisville, Kentucky, to be the heavyweight champ of the world. And the other thing about this was, back then, and I remember this distinctly, Bill, if I asked you, and you're a bit of a sports fan, not as much as I, but if I asked you who's the heavyweight champion of the world, you wouldn't even know.
Not sure if I could now.
No, I don't know if I could. Right. Back then, we knew 3 things. We knew who was the president, we knew who was the heavyweight champ, and we knew if there was an astronaut up in the sky. It's so different now.
And I do remember that. And you remember how we also consumed it differently, because you had 3 channels.
That's
and maybe you would see a fight from time to time, but there were boxing matches you had to listen to on radio even in the 70s.
Yeah, and that was exciting too. And we were all used to that because, you know, how many of us went to bed with our transistor radio under the pillow so we could listen to baseball late at night? Right. But yeah, it was an event, and it was back when boxing, horse racing, and baseball were the 3 big sports. Ali was one of the first athletes who ever really positioned himself for television. I think the story is out now that he really appreciated Gorgeous George, the wrestler, and knew that he was getting a lot of attention, so he brought that attention to himself, and he was the perfect guy for it. He was a handsome guy. He could speak, he could rhyme, and by God, could he fight.
And enjoyed the showmanship, as you point out. Again, another conversion in that later in his life he became so committed to humanitarian causes and so forth. And I think part of the goodbye this week that Louisville and Kentucky at large has been and giving him as a show of appreciation for that.
There's no question about it. And, you know, when he began to really personify the humanitarian drive that you were talking about, and just, you know, peace and love and things like that, you know, some of the hippies used to espouse, you know, but I think people listening to him realize this is a guy who cut across all manner of culture, black, white, brown, whatever, and he was a guy who lived it and made untold millions of dollars, but shared it with people. And you know, the fact that he was a tremendous athlete, but it still appealed to people who weren't all that interested in sports, I think says an awful lot.
Transcended.
Absolutely,
yeah.
he did.
So no surprise to you that you have a former president, that you've had people from around the world who have come in, and that Louisville just has ached this week in saying goodbye to Ali.
And it's interesting because we talk about you know, cutting across things. Well, it aches, and yet it is so proud, you know, to be the home of Muhammad Ali. How many people, including my own brother and sister-in-law, my nephew, yesterday on my nephew's birthday, went to the home of Muhammad Ali in the West End of Louisville. So,
which is a pink house,
exactly. It sticks out a little bit. But there is pride, there is sorrow, but there is pride. And sadly, you know, the Parkinson's robbed us of 30 years of his wisdom and wit. But it sort of eased him away from us. You know, we always knew he was around, and we knew that he was afflicted. The last time I was near him was, gosh, 15 or 20 years ago at the Kentucky Athletic Hall of Fame, and he was having a difficult time speaking. And I was about as close to him as I am to you, but there was such a long line of people that I wouldn't even have dreamed of trying to cut in for an autograph. But everybody, he took care of everybody that night.
Dick Gabriel, you're good to come in and reminisce. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
We want to thank you for joining us for this edition of Kentucky Newsmakers. I'll see you this week bright and early on WKYT This Morning. You make it a good week ahead.